So the OSA was leaked by the Chinese leaker. What is that, and what we can expect from this new AA for the Soviets and the Germans if added? Hello guys, once again it's Matt. Thank you all the members and patrons, make sure to subscribe. And yeah guys, I wanted to talk a little bit about the OSA because it is a very interesting missile system. It is actually the first mobile air defense missile system incorporating its own engagement radar on a single vehicle. So basically it has everything needed to fire a missile on one vehicle. It was basically the first one to do that, and it's a very early way of doing that, you know, and of course a very early vehicle. It's from the early 70s, right? So it is very old, and yeah, what can we expect? The first thing is, let's explain a little bit what the OSA is actually, So it's basically a chassis of a vehicle, armored vehicle, not a lot of armor, so you can expect not a lot of armor, but it has a multitude of radar antennas and other systems to be able to fire and use air-to-air ground-to-air missiles without the need of a help of any other vehicle, right? So it has a search radar on top of it. It has a tracking radar of the vehicle itself. That search radar has around 30 kilometers of range on the models that we'll probably see in the game. And of course the tracking radar, it has around 20 kilometers of a range on the tracking of targets, right? And then it has two antennas on the sides of the main tracking radar to actually guide the missile itself. So one of them detects the missile apparently, and one is basically a data link to command the missile, if I'm not mistaken, right? And on top of the main tracking radar, it has also an IRST, right? Basically a infrared search and track that can actually be used when the radar is jammed, and of course still fire the missiles. The missile will basically be a Cyclones missile, if I'm not mistaken. It is radar guided, but at the end of the day it is apparently command guided, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I just confirmed that indeed, yeah, it is a missile that is guided by command. So basically the gunner, quote unquote, will need to guide the missile to the target, and it can actually guide two missiles at once, but in a single target, obviously, right? It has a booster, a normal booster of 2 seconds, and then in these 2 seconds the radar will actually acquire the missile and use the information between what you are locking on and the actual radar or the missile position, and then guide the missile with that. That's pretty much kind of what it looks like in real life. So it's kind of an interesting system and very early. The good part about this is that you can actually and the Soviets love this type of system, is that it basically becomes immune to ECM, technically, from that time at least, right? Because you can always have a different type of guidance, a different type of detection to actually be used, and different types of frequencies and stuff to actually use these things in real life scenarios where there is a lot of ECM, which is something that the Soviets noticed that the Americans were actually doing a lot in the Vietnam War. So it is basically the evolution of any type of guidance system, but being smaller, and of course being able to be driven and self-shooting, self-everything, right? So this is basically what this vehicle is. For the missile itself, although the tracking range is around 20 kilometers for the version that we are gonna get, doesn't mean that it will have this amount of range, right? The max speed of these missiles are quite slow, to be honest. It has a 15-second sustainer after the 2-second burner, and basically flies up to Mach 2.4. So it's not the fastest thing ever, but it is pretty fast for a ground-launched missile, right? But yeah, the engagement altitude will be around 10 to 12 kilometers, depending on version. It could be less than that a little bit, 5 kilometers, but I doubt that it will be that low, just because of the version that we are gonna get, which is basically an 80s version out of it. And of course the range out of it will be around 15 kilometers, kinda, it depends on situation, but I wouldn't fire this missile from too long ranges. It's a missile that it's made for kind of a short range engagement. The objective was to introduce a radar missile in the mobile parts of a battle, basically, right? So you don't have the large systems These systems you can hide and defend from up close, the tanks and stuff in the battlefield. So it is a different type of game, like it's a different type of AA system from what they were used to before, right? It's one of the first, as I said, right? And should it actually be added? That's the thing, right? A lot of people were complaining that the Soviets don't deserve to have another AA system. And I gotta be honest, there is two ways of talking about this. Yes, there are holes in the tech tree of the Soviet Union, and especially for the German tech tree. The Germans really deserve something like this. But the Soviets, indeed, they have a lot of AA systems, but they do have holes that need filling on the terms of AA systems. Yeah, every nation does. That's the problem, right? Where it will be, I don't know exactly. Probably after the Shilka, the initial Shilka, maybe after the second Shilka or in between the Shilkas, around that era, probably. Or maybe even close to the Strela, after the Strela, before the Strela, something like that. And you can see that the jump between there, it's 1.0, 1.3 in BR. So there are gaps that need filling in the Soviet Union. This is indeed, and you cannot deny this. The problem is not the OSA being added. To be honest, the problem is other nations not having AA systems. That's where I think it lays the problem, you know. It's not that the Soviets are going to have another AA system. It's more like the US doesn't have one in some BRs, for example, between 10.3 and 11.7, or between 7.7 and 9.0. These are very big gaps that the US, for example, don't have any AA systems, or between 4.0 and 7.7, right? So there are huge gaps in other nations, and I'm not even talking about Great Britain that has a huge amount of gaps, other smaller nations, you know, so like the Japanese, for example, have huge gaps there as well. So every single nation has these gaps. It's just that the Soviets are the ones that have the least amount of those gaps, right? And that's kind of scary if you think about it, because it's going to be another AA system to a nation that is one of the best ones in AA systems. But then we have another problem of what is there to actually be added for other nations anyway, because the Soviets, they had a very mobile kind of doctrine on that regard, you know. Their whole doctrine was to be fast and nimble, especially with their, you know, tanks and stuff. And to defend their tanks, if they are mobile enough, they need to have a very mobile AA system, you know, an air defense system behind that. So of course they have a lot more options than other nations, and that's where probably exported models and prototypes come for other nations. But we already have that. Most of the vehicles in the US in the air defense tech tree, line, are basically prototypes, you know, the M247, the XM975, the ADATs. The ADATs kind of not a prototype, but I don't think the US fully utilized that. I could be wrong. You let me know in the comments. So there's a lot of prototypes there, right? While the Soviets have basically mainly production models, apart from, like, you know, the ZSU-37-2 and some minor ones in the early war, right? So it's complicated. The Soviet Union has so many examples out of it that it's hard not to add one, right? That's what Gaijin at least tells us. So I don't know what we can do to solve this problem. I'm excited about the OSA. I always wanted that, so hopefully it's added. But I understand that people are just, you know, another AA for the Soviets. So let me know in the comments, what do you think would be the problem solving for other nations in this, like, air defense forces, since the Soviets are so strong compared to other nations on that regard. Again, let me know in the comments, and I see you guys on the next one. And are you excited about the OSA? Let me know in the comments as well. Subscribe, and bye. See ya.